The Panasonic VariCam LT and RED Scarlet have very similar specs at a very similar price. They both shoot 4K, do 240 frames per second 1080p video, come in at under $25,000 and are true cinema cameras. Right now these two cameras are the most popular ones at that price point. So the question is, which one is better? The Panasonic VariCam LT comes in at $15,000 for the body and an additional $10,000 for the accessory kit. It shoots 4K video at 60 frames per second and does 1080p at 240 frames per second. It has the ability to record both original and proxies at once and includes enough ports for pretty much all cases. We also have the ability to swap out the lens mounts for either Canon or PL. The RED Scarlet-w comes in just under $13,000 for the brain and an additional $12,000 for a similar accessory kit. This brings both cameras right up to $25,000. The Scarlet-w can record 5K at 50 frames per second, 4K at 120 frames per second, and 1080p at 240 frames per second. We too find the ability to record proxy media as well as interchangeable lens mounts. The only difference here is that this camera is modular and does not include any ports. You'll need to buy modules which contain different ports for various needs. Before we go any further, I want to note that I am going to be using the Scarlet-x, not the W. It too does shoot 5K, but not at as high of frame rates. It's also a little bit older, but it did fit into the same price range when it was for sale. In fact, the Scarlet-x is more like the VariCam than the Scarlet-w is, so there's that. Both cameras record to proprietary SSDs, which are of course incredibly expensive. RED uses their mini mags, where Panasonic uses their P2 cards. They require their own card readers, however Panasonic's is quite large and needs an external power source. The VariCam does not record RAW, nor does it shoot 5K, but it does feature dual native ISO with a base at 800 and 5000. The RED also has a native ISO at 800, but does not have the same noise level at 5000. While Panasonic claims that 800 should look just like 5000, I'm going to have to argue about that. To test out the dual native ISO, I did two tests. One where I compared 800 to 5000, and another where I compared 4000 in base 800 to 5000 in base 5000. Comparing 800 to 5000, I do notice a little more noise in 5000 than 800. However, in 800 with properly exposed shadows, I do see a lot of noise. When I do grade the clip, however, we lose a little of that noise and it cleans up better. What I was most surprised about was when I compared 4000 in base 800 to 5000. This was a very dark scene with the aperture open to f1.8. Both are extremely noisy and I really can't tell a big difference between the two. While dual native ISO is a nice feature and in most cases should work, I wouldn't rely on this feature heavily as there's still a lot of noise in the image. On the other hand, the RED does also have some noise in the shadows at ISO 800, and the noise just gets worse from there. The VariCam does win in the ISO test, but just barely. Step outside and the noise is no longer an issue for either of these cameras. Because of that, we're going to test sharpness. Both cameras are shooting in their respective log profiles, and I will be using the same Sigma 18-35 lens. Before we get too deep into the test, I want to just let you know that I am by no means a professional colorist. I'm more of a technical than a creative professional, so if these don't look the best, that's why. The VariCam's white balance was a little off, and it was harder to grade than the RED, so don't totally base your decisions off of my poor coloring job. Taking a look at the sharpness, I was actually really surprised. Based on my initial testing of the VariCam by itself, I thought that it was super sharp and clear. But when I compared the two side by side, they both look really similar. Other than the color, I could really tell no difference between the two. I'm going to have to say that when picking between these two cameras, you should consider the physical features like modules and RAW formats rather than the image it produces. When color grading the images, the RED was a lot easier to do, mainly because it records RAW. The VariCam does not do that, so you can't do things like change the white balance and alter the color profile it was shot in. RED's IPP2 also helped in expediting the color grading process with only a few tweaks needed. The VariCam, on the other hand, needed a lot along with some more contrast, saturation, and exposure adjustments. As always, image isn't everything. It's important to take into consideration the built-in functionality of the camera. Both of these cameras weigh a ton and are really hard to hold for long periods of time. The RED that I'm using weighs 5 pounds for the body, where the VariCam weighs 6 pounds. Fully loaded, the VariCam comes in at a hefty 16 pounds. A similar config on the RED is about 10 to 13 pounds. Not something you'd want to carry around all day. I'd also like to note that the RED is modular. That means you can take things off and add them as needed. You can build it as big or as small as you want, based on your needs and its purpose. The VariCam comes pretty much all put together. You need the control panel in order to operate the camera. The side handle and shoulder mount is optional, as is the viewfinder, but those things don't really take off a lot of weight. There's not a lot you can do to its size and weight, and it'll be pretty hard to throw something like this on a drone or gimbal. Like I said earlier, both cameras record 1080p at 240 frames per second. Since I'm using an older model, mine doesn't do that, but just for fun, we did some tests with the VariCam, and they're pretty awesome. They both should look pretty similar, but I did notice a ton of noise even when we were outside in the bright sun. Because the sensor crops in, we have a lot less light to work with, and the 800 base drops to actually 400 when using variable frame rate, and I didn't even need to use any ND. It looked pretty well exposed, so it's strange that we got a lot of noise. Moving inside, there is even more, and the image is pretty much unusable. However, I did need to bump the ISO up to 5000 with a wide open aperture. There's also minor things about the build of the VariCam that I'm not a big fan of. With the RED, you can place a monitor pretty much anywhere, and it can be angled all over the place. On the VariCam, it can only be mounted on the back of the camera. You can tilt it up and down, as well as turn it from side to side, but it's really hard to view it great from the side at any angle above horizontal. I wish there was some way you could just reposition it anywhere other than the back. There's also no actual live view monitor on the VariCam. You can see what the camera sees through the viewfinder, but if you want to view it on the screen, you'll need to press the view button on the control panel. Then whenever you want to change any setting, you have to exit the live view and make your adjustments. Unable to see the visible light cut. While it seems like I don't like the VariCam, these are just minor issues. The focus peaking mode on it is amazing. Not only does it show you false color based on what's in focus, but it also shows squares on objects that are in focus. It's pretty awesome and I really love it. There's not a very good focus peaking mode on the RED, and it's something I have to refer to on another monitor. I'm also a big fan of the shoulder mount and the side grip. It's nice that we actually have a first party handle that interfaces with the camera. The RED doesn't have a first party side grip, and the ones that exist don't feature all the same buttons. Another neat feature about the VariCam is it's a camcorder-like build, and it has built-in ND. There are 3 levels of ND, and it's nice that you don't have to carry any filters around anymore. It's something that I missed when I switched over to RED, and now I have to deal with matte boxes and filter cases. So after all this, what camera should you pick up, and which one is the best? Based on my testing, I feel like these two cameras perform very similarly. The VariCam is newer by a year or two, but I really can't say that one is better than the other. Like I've said multiple times before, a lot of these decisions is going to come down to the build, what you like and don't like about the camera, its features, and some of the shooting amenities, if you will. I would personally recommend the RED Scarlet over the VariCam for a few reasons. First, it's a little cheaper than the LT, plus it records 5K, RAW, has great color science, is modular, and has an amazing community. Well, there you go. A really long but hopefully helpful comparison. If you have any questions about these cameras, be sure to let me know. If you like this video, leave a like and hit the subscribe button for more videos like this. This is Mark with Apple Tech 128, and I'll see you in the next one.